Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us for this webinar on advancing your science policy career, how to build the skills for the career you want. The joint webinar will feature AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellows and alumni, as well as editorial and governing board members from the Journal of Science Policy and Governance. Panelists will describe how they leverage their work with AAAS STPF and Jspg to advance their careers in science policy. They will also discuss the skills and resources necessary to succeed in policy at different career stages. My name is Adriana Bankston, and I'm currently the Chief Outreach Officer of the Journal of Science Policy and Governance. I will be moderating this webinar, which is part of our partnership with AAAS STPF. At the start, I would like to extend a special thank you to Sahil Mehta, who is Jspg's Director of Communications, for making the beautiful graphics and for promoting the webinar. We hope this event will be both informative and inspiring for all of you, and we're eager to hear from you and interact with you throughout the webinar. So before we move on, we'd like to learn a little bit more about you. And so we have a general question for you about why you're here today and what you hope to get out of this webinar. So you'll see a poll will appear on your screen, and you'll have about 10 seconds to answer. Please follow the instructions to share your response. Great, thank you. So it looks like most of you are here to learn about policy careers in general, jumpstarting your careers, as well as learning about resources and opportunities in policy. This is great. So we'll be covering all these today, as well as specific information about Jspg, STPF, and other opportunities. We'll be doing that as well. So thank you for that. Now let's move on to Jessica. I would like to introduce Jessica Soule, who is the Project Director for Recruitment and Alumni Engagement for the SMT Policy Fellowships. Jessica?
Thank you, Adriana, and thank you to JSPG for hosting the session today. And hello, everyone. We're really glad you are joining us today. We know you're really busy and you could be doing something else with this hour, and you have chosen to be here with us, so thank you. So why are we here today? We probably want to have a conversation with our stellar panel, yes, and to learn about science policy resources, absolutely, and to feel more connected to others in this community. That's all true, but let's go a little deeper. Next slide, please. I'd like for everyone to close their eyes if you're comfortable with that, or maybe glance away from your screen, and I would like for you to imagine if everyone here, all 156 of us, pursued their interest in science policy and science communication. Imagine if everybody made an impact at the local, state, federal, international level with policy. Imagine if everybody communicated about science to their family and friends and community, to elected officials, to the students, to the media, to their peers. And imagine if we did this throughout our lives for years and decades to come. It's a powerful image, isn't it? Thankfully, it does not have to be imagine if. Next slide, please. Instead, let's imagine how to accomplish what we just pictured. How will you engage with policy? When will you engage with policy? Where will you engage? Who else will we engage in this effort? As we begin this session, I really encourage us to embrace this shift from if to how. I bet that every one of you imagined a different vision for the future. Perhaps your how included applying to a science policy fellowship like the AAAS Policy Fellowships. Or perhaps your how was becoming involved in organizations like JSPG. These are both excellent ways to hone your skills and build your network. But no matter what you envisioned, you belong here in this community. And there is no right way to get involved or stay involved in science policy and science communication throughout your career. Your vision is valid. And more than that, we need your vision to bring science to policymaking. So with this in mind, I would like to revisit the question of why are we here today? And we're here, all of us are here, your panel is here to be a resource to you as you map out your how. Next slide, please. So if you are interested in STPF after today's conversation, you'll hear from the panelists who will be able to share about their unique experiences as fellows. And there are excellent resources for prospective applicants on our website. I will put it in the chat box in a moment. But I won't cover that in detail here because I know you can spend time reading that on your own. And we'll be sure to share all of these resources after the webinar as well in a handout. So thank you all for joining. And with that, I want to return the floor to Adriana and then to our panel.
Great, thank you, Jessica. So we will hear more about the fellowship program later from our panelists. Now, I would like to introduce you to the Journal of Science Policy and Governance. Jspg is an internationally recognized open access, peer-reviewed publication, as well as a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We are managed by students and for students, policy fellows, and early career scholars of all academic and professional backgrounds. And more than that, we are an independent, free, and open source forum for debate and discourse for early career researchers to engage in science and technology policy. Our mission is to help students and early career scholars bolster their research and writing credentials in science and technology policy. We encourage young scholars to engage in and contribute to the policymaking process at all levels of government, including at the local, state, and national level, as well as internationally. We contribute to the professional development and growth of our authors by helping them write for a diverse set of audiences. And in addition to the publications, we also actively promote published work via social media, our global mailing lists, as well as individual and organizational outreach and other channels, including a new podcast. Jspg publishes policy research in a variety of formats listed here, including OPEDs, technology assessments, policy memos and analyses, and others. Articles cover every corner of science and technology policy, and you can see a list of topics that we publish on here. These include artificial intelligence, STEM education and workforce, science communication, and government industry university interfaces, just to name a few examples. So since I just told you about a lot of different policy areas, we want to ask you now to tell us with another question, what is your favorite area of science policy? And choose one of the categories from the options presented. Great, thank you for your responses. So it looks like we have a pretty wide range. Scientific research policy is expected, climate change, that makes sense, health policy as well, education and data science. So this is really helpful for us to know where you're coming from today. So thank you for answering that question. Before we start the panel discussion, I would like to remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded and we reserve the right to share it after the event. So if you have any issues, please let us know. You can ask your questions for the panelists in the Q&A section as shown on the screen. And please also note if your question is directed towards a particular panelist. We also encourage you to share about the event on social media by tagging SciPol Journal and AAAS STPF on Twitter and using Advancing SciPol as a hashtag. And you can find the social media information in the chat. With that, I would like to introduce our panelists today. Lida Beninson is a senior program officer for the Division of Policy and Global Affairs at the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. She is also a former AAAS STPF at the National Science Foundation, as well as a member of the Jspg governing board. Thank you, Lida, for being part of Jspg in this capacity. Next, we have Iris Wagstaff, who is STEM Program Director in the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Department at AAAS. She's also a former AAAS STPF at the National Institute of Justice. Thank you, Iris, for being here today. Benjamin Isakoff is a current AAAS STPF at the US Department of State. He is also a former editorial board member with JSPG. Thank you, Ben, for all your work with the journal. You can also follow Ben on Twitter at BP Isakoff. And finally, Stephanie Davis is also a current AAAS STPF. She's at the National Institute of Aging, Office of Small Business Research. She is also a current JSPG editorial board member. Thank you, Stephanie, for your efforts with JSPG. And you can follow Stephanie on Twitter at StephMDavis. We're really glad to have you all here today. Thank you for joining us, and we're looking forward to hearing more about your science policy expertise as well as career path that we will discuss with our audience. So I will turn this off. Great, so let's start with a general question for all of you in sort of a short elevator pitch, 30 to 60 seconds. Can you tell us more about your career path in science policy and your current role, and what motivated you to get started, and how did you first get plugged in? Let's start with Stephanie.
Yes, so to give a bit of a background about what I do in science policy, many people don't know that the private sector is actually supported in so many ways by the public sector. And when people think about government agencies, they don't always realize that government agencies are one of the biggest investors for small businesses, especially those in the health tech and biotech sectors. So my role, specifically within the National Institutes of Health, is to help improve programs that support small companies that are going to help develop cures for diseases within the focus area of the NIH.
Thank you, Stephanie. How about you, Ben?
There we go. So I'm currently a diplomat at the State Department. A big part of my job is engaging with foreign governments directly on science technology issues. Specifically, I work on AI foreign policy issues. So I'm talking to other governments, other parts of the United States government that deal with foreign countries, and working out and actually presenting and doing the policy around artificial intelligence in foreign policy.
Great. Iris?
So I definitely have a windy career path. It definitely has not been linear. So my current role at AAAS is I manage a portfolio of programs and initiatives focused on broadening participation in STEM, workforce development, and inclusive innovation. That being able to manage those programs from a national science policy level is great. Prior to that, I was a AAAS policy fellow at the National Institute of Justice, but my background is in chemistry. So I was a research chemist for Dow Chemical for 15 years in an area that I loved, and some life changes happened. I transitioned to STEM education by going back to grad school in STEM education, policy and research, and then wound up in the policy arena, working on issues that I've basically been working on for over 25 years, which is broadening participation in STEM.
That's great to hear. Thank you. And Lida?
Well, first, Adriana, thank you so much for inviting me to join this very esteemed panel. I wish I could see everybody in person and hope I have a chance to connect with everybody in the future. So at the National Academies of Sciences, I kind of work as a generalist. I have projects that I work on that are supported by NIH, NSF, the Pentagon, as well as various philanthropic organizations and even private sector companies as well. Our role at the National Academies is we are advisors to the nation on issues on science and technology policy, and our sort of informal catchphrase is our job is to speak truth to power. So for me, it is a dream job in science policy. And even though my background is in biomedical research, I am doing all sorts of projects where if you had asked me 5, 10 years ago if I would be doing these projects, I would have said you're out of your mind. But I have a very broad portfolio of work that I do, and it works well for me because I learned in grad school that I get bored easily. So I never get bored with my job. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for that introduction. Now, we'd like to find out a little more about your career path in science policy and any advice that you might have for early career researchers who are entering science policy careers. So for Ben and Stephanie, what was your first experience doing science policy or science communication work, and how did that translate to what you currently do? Ben?
My first, professional opportunity to do this was when I did a congressional fellowship a few years ago. I worked in the Senate, but prior to that, boy, I'd been, kind of, I guess, and this is my advice for early career researchers, which is just like, do a bunch of stuff, even very small things. Whether it's engaging just on social media on some topics, or reading, or showing up to a protest or to a Hill Day, or anything like that. Like, do a lot of stuff like that. And so I was doing a ton of different things like that, kind of gradually increasing, doing more and more as I got more interested and well connected in this world.
That's really great. Thank you. Stephanie?
So I'd have to say my first foray into science policy was when I was a postdoc. I applied for the American Society for Pharmacology and Experimental Therapeutics Washington Fellows Program. I had previously been involved with student government as an undergraduate and a grad student, and I kind of thought that policy making intersecting with science would be a good field for me, but I hadn't really had any advocacy experience until that point. But this was a really great program. It allowed me to go and interact with lawmakers on Capitol Hill and talk about issues that are important to pharmacology researchers, since I'm a pharmacologist by training. And after that, that's actually when I kind of solidified my decision to apply for the STPF program. And, since then, I've been heavily involved in a lot of areas of science policy within the NIH, but also in extracurriculars that I do. And it's something that I have not regretted one bit. It was a really great experience, and I'm glad that I had that to kind of jumpstart my policy career.
Yeah, that's great advice to start early while you're still doing your training. Thank you. So for Lida and Iris, what skills do you think were most important for you for succeeding in science policy, and how did you cultivate those skills? Lida?
Thank you. So I actually wrote down quite a lot of notes for the skills part, but I'll just say, my first foray into science policy was the fact that I got to enroll in a science policy graduate certificate program on my campus. But that was all sort of theoretical. And my first actual dip into doing science policy was actually as an intern at the National Science Foundation one summer during my graduate studies. And it was there during my internship where I was helping to evaluate one of their award programs that I realized that I did like the job in person. And so from there, when I had to go back to school to finish my dissertation, that's when I found the Journal of Science Policy and Governance and joined their editorial board to start improving my skills as a writer and editor in science policy. And then I got involved with some of the local policymakers in my area to kind of keep them up to date on some of the issues that were affecting our research community at our university. When you talk about the skills that I've seen in my experience as being really important to build for at least a career path that I've followed, I kind of came up with about 7 skills, and so I'll just kind of line them up. One of them is you have to be a good researcher, but not necessarily in being the kind of researcher that you are trained as for a PhD scientist. I think that lays the groundwork, but you have to learn how to research very, very quickly on issues and topics that you may not know anything about. And you don't have the kind of time that you may have had in graduate school to not necessarily become an expert, but at least become useful or sometimes dangerous in many cases. And once you are able to do that research, you need to be able to communicate that research to people who don't have your background, who may need to know just the most essential parts of what you've researched. And so that includes both oral communication and writing. So you need to learn how to take something that's very, very complicated and sometimes boil it down to just a couple of paragraphs about why it's important, why it matters, and here's the data and evidence that support, one line of decision making or the other. Another skill is, this is not an area where you get to kind of, sit in your cubicle and work by yourself. You do have to collaborate. And it is a really important skill. It's not something I think I learned very well in a graduate school, but, you kind of learn trial by fire when you're in science policy. And so what's great is the Science and Technology Policy Fellowship Program creates a wonderful network of people that you can reach out to for help on collaboration and resources. And then after that, once you're sort of like moving through, you may want to get to the point where you have to start directing people and managing people. And that's not just managing a team that supports the work that you're doing, but oftentimes you have to manage up. You may be working with some top researchers in the world. You may be working with, elected officials, appointed people who are the primary decision maker. And, your job is not only to take information and inform them on science policy issues, but oftentimes you've got to get them to play with one another. And that takes a lot of management skills. There's a lot of humility in there. And there's a lot of organizational and structural skills that come along with it. And it's not easy. But I think altogether, those are really important. But at the kind of pinnacle of it all, I think to be successful in science policy, you have to be a fast learner. You have to pick up things. You sometimes have to pick up completely new languages very, very quickly. And so hopefully it's something that you enjoy. But, I think that's one of the keys to having a successful career in science policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for mentioning Jspg as part of your journey. And I agree with working in collaboration with other folks and sort of learning on your feet quickly. I have that as well in my job. Iris?
Sure. So I guess I've been actually engaged in politics and policy on some level for many years. Even in high school and college, I served as a page and intern in the House and the Senate. So working on general policy issues. And I've been, working in the area of broadening participation in STEM for decades before STEM was an acronym and before, broadening participation was a thing. I've been developing informal science programs in the community, developing partnerships between, industry, academia, and community organizations. So I've been involved in that area for a long time. Some of the skills that I think are critical, and which is what the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship is all about, and really helped me to hone, was being able to translate your STEM expertise and those skills to solve national science policy issues. So recognizing, what's already embedded in STEM disciplines like teamwork, critical thinking, and as Lida said, being able to, take information and digest it and understand it quickly and communicate that. That's a very important skill. One thing that I thought was helpful for me is listening, just really listening, when you're going into these agencies as a fellow, really listening, doing the informational interviews, finding advocates, finding common ground. All of these skills have been important. Also really learning how to make the case. And I think that's something that the fellowship really taught me to do well. And that's helped me with my grant writing, really making the case for, why should this agency fund yet another STEM program? Like, how is this different? Really boiling down your elevator pitch. I think, all those skills are really important. And it was important for me to transition from a, bitch research chemist to STEM education to policy, because we've been dealing with issues of racial and social and environmental justice for for decades, and these issues directly affect me, you know, and other people of color. So I think it's very critical for you know, underrepresented students and professionals in STEM to really engage in science policy.
Great, thank you for making that important point about the science policy field. So I'm curious about more specifics, since you mentioned a few things that you were doing to make you competitive for the fellowship and your experience. If there are any other specifics that you'd recommend for early career researchers who are now preparing for the fellowships or applying, or what sort of things you were doing that made you competitive. Ben?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think going into the fellowship, one thing that will never hurt you, and especially working in all of public policy, is being very informed about what's happening in politics. You know, if you are drawing a big distinction between policy and politics, don't. They are deeply intertwined and will always influence each other. And so, you know, just make sure you're reading the news and reading it from good and varied sources. Don't get all of your news from one, you know, just one cable news channel, for example. Get it from diverse sources and make sure they're good sources. So I'd say that's one thing you can do that would be very helpful.
Great. And Stephanie?
So my strategy, and this sort of applied in grad school, but it definitely applied when I started my postdoc and I really started to narrow down science policy as my ideal career path, but it was basically do all the things. So I had a lot of volunteer roles outside of my lab duties, and it was a bit of a juggling act, but I'd say the biggest ones that probably played the most instrumental role were being involved with my university's Postdoc Association. So I did my postdoc at the University of Kentucky. I was the vice president of our Postdoc Association, which was called the Society of Postdoctoral Scholars. So through that, I had a lot of experience advocating on behalf of the postdoc body and working in collaboration with people in administrative roles. So that was a really valuable experience. Being involved with the Future of Research. So that's a nonprofit that I serve as the clerk of, actually, on the board of directors. That's actually how I met Adriana. So we've worked together for years on that, and that was probably one of the most valuable experiences. I've had a chance to put together, important workshops focusing on improving mentoring practices. I participated in a study looking at early career researcher leadership in scientific societies. Both of those actually just got published in eLife, so I got 2 publications out of that, which is awesome. And then also, speaking of early career leadership, I also served as the Young Scientist Committee Chair at ASPET, and that was a really important role because after I did their fellowship program, I got to know their director of education really well by leading this committee, and she was actually one of my letters of rec for the program, and she was an NSF fellow several years back. So getting to know her and getting to talk to her as an alumni fellow was really useful for getting involved. But what I would recommend to you all is don't listen to people who say that you should only be at the bench and you should only concentrate on things that academia deems respectable or important, because being in science policy requires you to be well-rounded, and it requires you to be able to interact with people of different backgrounds. And volunteer roles are the best way to do that. So just take full advantage of any of these opportunities because you won't regret it and they will help you in the long run.
Yes, that's very helpful. Thank you for mentioning. I think leadership as well as local engagement is really helpful, especially for those of us who are not in DC or were not and wanted to develop our careers in that way. So I want to point this to Lida, since you mentioned a few things that you did sort of on the local level. Are there things you would recommend in terms of local engagement if people are not in DC or before that?
Yeah, granted, these all happened in a pre-COVID environment, so I think to do some of these activities, you have to get creative. And so, when I was back on campus, I was in Boulder, Colorado. So there were times when I would arrange meetings with, our local representative, and I would talk to them about like issues where maybe NSF or NIH funding was at risk of being cut. And so I wanted to talk to them about how our region specifically was benefiting from the investments made in these government research agencies. And, you know, it was an easy sell. You know, the representative at the time was very pro-science, and, you know, he would say, look, you've got my vote, but I still thought it was my like almost like civic duty, and because it was also interesting to me to make sure I had that conversation and let them know that I was available if there were any issues or questions about some of the more technical aspects. So especially big during my time in graduate school was sequestration, and so there was a big fear that 10% of all federal budgets were going to be cut, and then they actually were. And what was amazing was before sequestration hit, most of the campus literally said, Congress couldn't possibly be that stupid. And so nobody had actually prepared for the fact that, you know, their research funding agencies were going to have cuts. And so to me, I thought it was a really important for me to not only have that conversation with our local representative, but also have that conversation with folks on campus. And so I actually held brown bag seminars to say, okay, this is what sequestration is going to mean to you. And I had enough data where I could say worst case scenario, best case scenario. And worst case scenario was you're going to get cut and they're just going to kick the can down the line. And it was a really great experience for me to just do something outside of the bench during my grad school and find a way to engage my research community and also engage a lot of the faculty at my institution as well. And then another thing we did was I was part of a group called the Forum on Scientific Ethics and Policy. And we tried to engage in activities that would also bring our community together. So sometimes we would arrange movie viewings, like let's say a documentary on wind farming, and we would invite the community to come to that. And then we would also arrange to have panelists who were either policymakers from that region that was highlighted in the documentary, and then researchers who were doing work that was relevant to the documentary, and give our community as well as the students an opportunity to engage with folks about the movie. And it was a kind of a fun way to do that, especially for me, where, you know, I didn't want to necessarily, I wasn't the expert, I didn't want to be the panelist, but I really did want to find a way to bring science to my local community. So those were a few strategies that I used back then.
Great, very helpful. Iris, did you have anything to add?
Sure. So some of the things that I always tell my mentees or students or early professionals interested in policy is first really recognizing that a lot of times some of the things that you're already doing is you're already engaging in policy. So if you discuss an issue that you care about, you're engaging in policy. And if you're a student, you know, you can either blog or vlog about issues that you care about. That's policy. There are ways, especially if you're a student researcher in STEM programs or agencies like NSF, NIH, they have a huge emphasis on broader impacts and public dissemination. So there are opportunities within your STEM research, if it's funded by, you know, an agency like an NSF or an NIH, to, you know, disseminate your research and your results. That's part, engaging the public is part of science policy. So there are opportunities like that. I recently spoke to a group of students at my alma mater, North Carolina State University. They formed a science policy club. So you can form clubs, you can invite speakers. So there are things that you can do informally where you're actually engaging in policy at all these different levels. If you write a letter to your congressperson, that's, you know, engaging in policy. And I also wanted to mention, somebody mentioned leadership. I'm a huge proponent of being actively involved in your professional societies. I'm a longtime member, 28-year member of ACS and 27-year member of NOBSHE, and there are leadership opportunities in science policy and advocacy that you can develop, you know, those leadership skills within, you know, working with your professional societies.
Great. Yes, I definitely agree about societies. And thank you for mentioning also engagement and writing. That's a big part of, I think, something that early career researchers need to learn as they're starting their science policy careers. So along those lines, I want to shift now a little bit to talking more about your fellowship experience in terms of how, if you can describe your experience and your current placement, and also a little bit about how JSPG sort of fits into that and your writing skills and how that's helped you in the fellowship and beyond. Start with Stephanie.
So I actually found out that I was selected for the editorial board of JSPG the week of our final interviews for the STPF program. So that was kind of an interesting little coincidence, but it's a really great experience being on the editorial board. One of the things that I really enjoy is I get to work with people with different areas of science and policy expertise, and getting to read these articles that are being submitted to the journal. These are excellent quality articles being written by trainees, graduate students, postdocs, and fellows. And it also, one of the things that I really appreciate is I have a very kind of focused area of policy knowledge in the intersection of biomedical research and entrepreneurship and innovation in my current placement. But with JSPG, every time I get to edit an article, I get to learn something new. And there are articles being submitted outside of my expertise. So it's such a great opportunity just to kind of stay in touch with other areas of science policy and what's going on in the world. So, you know, in addition to being able to kind of hone in on your communication editorial skills, which is something that will come in handy if you have any sort of job which requires written and oral communication, and mine requires a lot of that. But it's also a great learning opportunity. And I'm really grateful for all of my experience with JSPG. And yeah, I recommend anybody who wants to get SciComm experience or just improve their science policy knowledge to apply for the editorial board.
Great, thank you. How about you, Ben?
So I definitely endorse everything Stephanie just said. And I just add that, you know, being an editor, I think that at the journal has had, in my experience, had a ton of overlap with what my job was on the Hill, which is to say, it's, you know, exactly like Stephanie was saying, ton of new concepts like all the time. You know, sometimes I'm kind of a fast turnaround, like I don't know anything about this subject, but and also I don't have time to become an expert in it. I just need to learn enough to engage at the appropriate level with what what I need to do here. So if somebody send me a bill and the senator is like, all right, do we co-sponsor this or do we vote for it or something? I'm like, okay, well, I got to figure it out. So it's like close reading, just like you do when you're working on an article as an editor or writing an article, close reading the bill, trying to think about, okay, what is the implication of this whole giant mess of concepts that I'd never thought about before today? And going through the whole thing, and then ultimately, you know, making a recommendation. You know, should we publish this article? Should do the authors and make substantial revisions? And those are also options on a bill. Like we can go back to the person, the senator asking us to co-sponsor and say, well, you know, actually, if you change all this stuff around, then we'll co-sponsor. I actually do that all the time. It's pretty much how it works. It's very similar to writing a paper, actually. So I found that had a ton of overlap. A little bit less so. My current job, much more laser focused on artificial intelligence, but on the Hill, working on so many different things, I felt a lot of overlap.
That's really helpful. Thank you for talking about sort of the broader relevance of this experience. And for Lida, can you also comment on your experience with JSPG and more broadly about how, writing policy?
Sure. So again, I plus one what Ben and Stephanie said. What I'd like to add about the opportunity to work at JSPG is because this is a journal that is focused on younger scholars or early career scholars, the editing process is completely different than that of an academic or scholarly journal. It's far more collaborative because in many cases, this is the author's first submission to any sort of academic journal whatsoever. And so I recall during my time, we sort of took the time to actually have very meaningful exchanges to help improve the quality of the work. And so right there was such a unique opportunity to work with somebody whose expertise was completely different from you, but had a huge interest in an area of science policy. And so having that chance to work with someone to help them better express their vision, their ideas, their objectives, also gave me an opportunity to learn about it, but also those collaborative skills were really, really helpful, because that's how things are now. In science policy, I am not the sole author of just about anything, right? I work with other people to develop proposals. I work with other people to develop reports and proceedings and briefs, right? And even if it's, okay, I'll draft something and would you edit it, to let's actually co-write certain sections and then find a way to work together so it sounds cohesive and of one voice. That is something I do almost all the time with my job. So much of my job involves writing. And it even happens in emails too. Like sometimes you're writing emails to people who are either decision makers or people who are influencers, and you want to take the time to make sure that your message is coming across clearly, and that you're keeping your objectives in mind. And where I am, we have to maintain our independence and objectivity. So we have to come across as though here's the information, but we are not going to necessarily push you in one direction or another for what you should decide to do or what your action should be. It's really, learning how to paint the picture that they need in order for them to make the decisions that they have to make. And so I think the experience I had on the editorial board really gave me a valuable opportunity to learn how to collaborate in the writing process, which is something I definitely didn't have before. And then I guess the only other a bit of advice that I have for folks who are moving into the fellowship space or science and technology policy fellowship space, you kind of come in oftentimes with some very big ideas about what's wrong with the world and why they don't love science enough or why they don't respect the field or something like that. And once you kind of get in, there's a lot of humility that comes with it. With any topic, with any issue that's at a national or global level, there are so many intricacies. And so I think having the approach that Stephanie mentioned before, saying yes to as much as you can, but approaching new projects and new opportunities with a large amount of humility and curiosity and inquisitiveness is really important, and realizing you're no longer the expert. You may have been the expert in this one field in your research area, but now even if that's what this event is that you're going to, or if that's what you're asked to speak on, you now need to think about your research in a completely different way than you did when you were in grad school. So I think a lot of that happens by, being open to the idea that, now what you've spent many years doing your research on is now going to have, is going to look very different in the eyes of the folks in the policy world.
Yes, very helpful. Thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about shift a little bit to more career advancement in terms of the things that you've learned in your fellowship and the skills that you have gained in terms of the relevance of what you do now. I think that would be really helpful for the audience to hear a little bit about your current role and what you're sort of do day to day. If we can start with Iris.
Hey, so I definitely really want to mention about my fellowship experience because most people don't know about NIJ. I served at the National Institute of Justice, which is the science agency of the DOJ, which most people have never heard of. And when I went into the fellowship application process, I went in thinking, of course, I'm going to be placed at NSF. It seemed like a great match on paper with my interest in STEM education and broadening participation. But when I got my interview list, I had several interviews with NSF, one with NIH and one with NIJ. And I was like, what is an NIJ? And why do they want to interview me? I had never heard of them. I have no background in forensic sciences, but when I heard about the awesome work of this very tiny agency, I was just really blown away. I mean, their mission is to improve understanding and knowledge of crime and justice issues through science. And they are actually responsible for funding the research that led to the revolution in DNA analysis and just so many things that, we don't know that this tiny agency was responsible for. So I actually turned down an offer at NSF in the engineering directorate to accept an offer with NIJ. And so I always share this story because it was one of the huge lessons that I learned from my fellowship experience is really to take strategic risks. because the work that I wound up doing at NIJ was developing and leading an agency-wide strategic diversity and inclusion initiative. And if I had accepted the offer at NSF to be with 50 other fellows, as opposed to taking a risk with NIJ and being one of 2 fellows, I never would have gotten that opportunity to, develop and lead an agency-wide initiative. And that has led to 2 publications that I have with NIJ. One received an award. It's opened doors with me to work on forensic science and diversity policy issues, to lead councils, to do consultation work. It also, in a winding way, led me to my current role at AAAS leading DEI efforts. So, I always share that one of the huge lessons that I learned from my fellowship is to take strategic risks, be willing to jump out there, and also recognize that, a lot of the work that I had been doing was already diversity work. It just wasn't packaged that way, and it just wasn't called that. So that's what I like to say, and it definitely impacts the work I do today. When I was at NIJ, I was starting from scratch. NIJ is not like a standalone science agency like an NSF or an NIH, where they're already working on diversity issues. So like there was no diversity work going on at NIJ. So I was literally starting from scratch. And some of the skills, again, that I mentioned before, really listening to people, finding out exactly what you do on a daily basis. I reframed the diversity training as having the, frank discussions to really make people more at ease to have these, conversations. So a lot of the skills that, I learned at the fellowship definitely impact my work today. Again, with grant writing, most of my grants are funded by NSF. So really learning how to make the case, finding common ground, finding advocates, and other resources. Again, the informational interview was very, very powerful. That's something I still use today, which directly impacts my work.
Great, thank you for that perspective. That's great to hear that you really enjoyed your fellowship experience. And I think this is excellent advice about thinking about taking strategic risks when you're going into this policy space. So I think that's a good segue to maybe Lida's role. If you want to tell us a little bit about what you do day to day.
Yeah, so as a senior program officer, I direct a lot of studies at the National Academies, and these studies are all formulated around national priority issues in science and technology. And so the studies that I direct are very, very broad. So I have issues that are on higher education, workforce, sustainability, and I've actually recently moved into the defense space and data science. And they all somehow converge. And on paper, it seems pretty wild, but it's actually pretty normal in the science policy world to have a very diverse portfolio of activities. And that's why those sort of key skills that I mentioned before are so important, because they really serve the foundation for when you kind of move around to where you take those strategic risks, as Iris was mentioning before. And I've definitely taken risks. I don't know that they've all been strategic, but I kind of go where I feel like I can make a difference. And what's great in my role is, when I'm tasked with directing a project or a study, it's my job to decide, okay, what are the objectives that we seek to meet in this study? And then who are the experts that need to be brought together, who represent a diversity of stakeholder perspectives, who can come together, deliberate on the issue. And then what's key in our work at the National Academies is I have to get this group of folks, of experts, usually between 8 and 20 people, to come to consensus on what the recommendation should be in order to address that national priority issue. And I don't know. I don't know how we keep doing it. We somehow get people to come to agreement on these things. But the thing is that every single one of our recommendations has to be rooted in data or evidence. And so that really drives our work. And so there is the aspect of organizing and managing a project. There's people management, as I was discussing earlier, but then there's also research aspects, there's writing aspects, because you've got to write the reports and you've got to write the the derivative products of the report so that they're meaningful to the decision makers and stakeholders. And a lot of what you do is you talk and you learn and you visit and you learn and you try to take what you've learned and disseminate it into information that's both useful to the committee and then useful for the people who asked for that study to be done. And so it is, for me, it's wonderful. I have the opportunity to learn from people and connect people who are just incredibly outstanding and have lifetimes of achievement of very, very cool work. And so on a personal level, I get to sort of observe their leadership styles. I get to observe how they work, how they lead their lives. And that's just kind of like an added benefit to the actual work of trying to create recommendations to create, positive policy in science and technology. So that's a bit of a summary of what I do. I'm very lucky to be at the organization where I am, that I get to do that. And I hope to continue doing it for a long time.
Great, thank you. And that was really helpful that you brought up some of the sort of day-to-day skills that I think could be really good transferable skills for our audience to think about how what they're currently doing can translate to what they might be doing in policy. So I want to ask Ben now to tell us a little bit about your fellowship experience, because I think you have a pretty unique experience, and also what you're thinking about doing afterwards.
Yeah, so right now at the State Department, I have a few different responsibilities. Some of it is kind of, I'd say, normal policy type work, answering the mail. Somebody wants to do this policy or do that thing, and so I gotta, give some feedback on it, or maybe I'm working to develop a policy. Maybe I'm working with outside stakeholders, other parts of the government or something. But I think what Adriana was referring to is, a part of my job is being an actual diplomat, representing the United States to foreign governments, sometimes in DC to foreign representatives to the United States, but sometimes on diplomatic trips. I got a diplomatic passport. It's black instead of blue. And I get to go through the expedited security at the airport and stuff like that. So that's pretty interesting. I was not expecting that. Even when I started my fellowship at the State Department, I didn't really realize that I was going to be part of what I was doing. And I think something I want to communicate to you early career researchers that this has taught me, and frankly is a lesson I've learned many times, is kind of related to imposter syndrome. When I was first starting to be involved in diplomatic engagements, with more senior diplomats, like that was pretty cool, and I was kind of learning the ropes and seeing how these things went. And then I remember the first time that they were like, "All right, Ben, can you go over to it was the embassy of the European Commission, the European Union in DC. They were like, Ben, can you go over there and explain this stuff to them?" And I was like, you want me to do that? Like by myself? Were you talking to somebody? Like, what? And I was a little nervous about it, but it was no big deal. Like I went over there, I already knew those people, so we had meetings with them. And then they were like, "All right, Ben, can you take this trip over to, Canada or the Netherlands or wherever?" And like, "All right, let's get this scheduled for you to go present in Israel." And it just I was like, I don't think this is correct. Why am I doing this? That doesn't make any sense. Shouldn't there be like an actual person doing this? But the truth is, and what I want you to understand is you are that person, and don't let things like imposter syndrome, don't assume that there's somebody who will who's gonna be looking over your shoulder, helping you out if you get it wrong. You are perfectly capable of doing this. You wouldn't be in this position, if you weren't. But more so, even if you do mess up, even if you fail, it's probably not going to be the end of the world. Like literally, even as a diplomat, if I were to mess up, it probably actually wouldn't cause a diplomatic incident. It would just be like, yeah, that guy from the US said something weird. We don't really get it, but all right, we'll figure it out with somebody else. Like it's no big deal. So yeah, you're awesome. You can do it, and don't be worried.
Great, thank you. And Stephanie, can you quickly tell us about your fellowship experience and what you're thinking about next steps?
Sure. So my fellowship experience, I always had an inkling that I was going to end up at the NIH. I am definitely a biomedical person. I figured it would either be the NIH or the NSF, because before that, my main policy interests were being an advocate for early career researchers. This was apparent in my roles in ASPET in future of research, as you know, on the postdoc committee through the National Postdoc Association. I was very focused on training and preparing early career scientists. However, there was something that came up in my final semester as a postdoc. So I had previously interviewed for this position at the tech transfer office at the University of Kentucky for an internship there. I was rejected for the job the first time around, and I, kind of resigned myself to not applying again because my postdoc was almost ending. 6 months before I was slated to leave, they asked me if I wanted to be an intern. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to be here for a full year, but sure, if you're okay with me only being there 6 months, I would love to do that. So I started interning part-time when I was a postdoc, and it was a really great experience. So that was kind of my first foray into the intersection between policy and biomedical entrepreneurship. So I had a little bit of experience. I was an econ minor back in undergrad, so I had always been kind of interested in the intersection of science and the private sector. But this internship specifically showed me that, especially with the small business programs, which is where I work now at the NIH, that there is a strong intersection between how policy and how government program management can be used to promote biomedical innovation and biotech companies in the private sector. So I actually reached out to my office that I am placed in right now and told them about my internship. And that's, that can sometimes happen where you reach out. And it was a calculated risk, but I really love the office that I'm in. I have a fantastic mentor. When I chose my office, I used the same strategy that I recommend grad students do when choosing a lab. Choose the mentor, then choose the research. That didn't let me down because my mentor is absolutely fantastic. And one of the things that I really enjoy, besides getting to kind of talk one-on-one with applicants, I've, gotten to build relationships with, CEOs, CSOs, people who've started their own biotech companies and are working on new cures for diseases such as Alzheimer's and other aging-related conditions. One of the things that I've gotten to do more recently is I am doing what's known as a detail. So NIH fellows are federal employees, which means they are allowed to kind of work part-time in other offices. So right now I'm pulling double duty in the National Institute on Aging, SBIR office, and I'm also acting as the part-time small business coordinator for the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute small business office. So I'm kind of representing two institutes right now, and that's where being a generalist really comes in handy because you're working with people with all different disease focuses, but having that strong background knowledge in a lot of different areas really comes in handy. So this detail, I don't know where it's going to lead. I'm kind of getting to the point where I'm looking for more permanent positions, but they do need a more permanent small business program coordinator there. So, maybe after this, it'll lead to a permanent job. Who knows? But I'm really enjoying my role thus far. And one thing that Ben mentioned that I wanted to kind of reiterate is, the small business world, even in biotech, is very old white male heavy. Like that's just, kind of how science is. It definitely mirrors academia in that regard. So I have had many times where I'm educating older, senior faculty members who started off companies, and I feel like, why am I talking to these people? Like, why am I being the one who's educating them? It seems weird because normally I was just this lowly postdoc and they were senior to me, but now I'm the expert. And, I think that's something that I'm always going to feel like, and that's normal. But what's important to remember is that you're here for a reason, and they selected you because they saw that you have that expertise and you have those skills to be successful. And, also it is a learning experience. Going from being a postdoc to government had a lot of things I had to learn. It's very different from academia, but that's okay because, nobody is going to, fully adjust to a new environment ASAP. It's going to take a learning curve. And I think that's normal, and it's important when you are going from scientific research to the public sector, is to just give yourself grace and give yourself room to make little mistakes here and there and learn, and don't be so hard on yourself. If I could do it again, I would be a lot less harsh on myself, but we're scientists. We're good at that.
Great, thank you. And thank you for mentioning diversity. So I know we're out of time, but I wanted to make this point for us to think about how we can make this field of science policy more diverse and inclusive. And if we can just hear a few remarks from Iris before we close.
I would say, you know, more events like this. Like I present on the Science and Technology Policy Fellowship many times throughout the year. I'm actually presenting for NOBSHE, specifically on the, which is the National Organization of Black Chemists and Chemical Engineers. So I've, you know, the whole time I was a fellow, and even now I'm constantly promoting the fellowship to diverse audiences and diverse communities. So I think efforts like this, you know, I share a lot with students at HBCUs, MSIs, and tribal colleges and universities, and, you know, as well as my network, which is pretty vast and diverse. So I think like more efforts like this, even down at the high school level, really sharing with students on how they could even work on like science projects that have, you know, social justice stance, or, you know, other types of ways to address policy issues in diverse communities. So I'd say start early and continue to expand and broaden awareness about these opportunities to diverse communities.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Iris, and thank you to all of you for being on the panel. We have a handout in the chat with other resources that you can look at from AAAS and other organizations, and we'll send that out by email as well. And we'd like to encourage you to apply to STPF by November 1st. Again, you can follow them on Twitter, and the next JSPG deadline is November 15th. And you can also subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at SciPol Journal. And thank you again for being here today, and have a great day.
Thanks so much.